Well, folks, are you ready? Opening day, March 27, 6 days away. We are going to see Juan Soto don his Mets uniform and actually perform in some live action. I cannot wait. And you know what? It's been, I would say, over the last year and a half, it's been a roller coaster, probably from mid 2023 on. The down feeling of the New York Mets giving up that season, then hiring David Stearns in the beginning of last year. And that's when I think, folks, this whole organization really turned the corner. David Stearns was the guy that Steve Cohen coveted from the beginning, right? All along, David Stearns was the guy. How special is David Stearns and how important is he to the New York Mets' overall success? And obviously, we know it is World Series. We got 2 World Series in our history, 69, 86. It is about time, folks. It is about time. Is 2025 going to be that year? It is sure the goal. It is sure the goal after spending $800 million on one player, Juan Soto, and getting a couple other big key additions. Obviously, bringing back Pete Alonso. That was monumental. What are we going to see in this video? We are going to talk about Scary Stearns. Will Salmon did a phenomenal article on Stearns and how important he is going to be. And folks, I've been preaching this ever since we got Stearns. All of MLB is aware and scared of the New York Mets. It's not the same old Mets. As soon as Steve Cohen hired David Stearns, everything changed, and it changed for the better. In this video, we are also going to look at some of the opening day roster. We're going to talk about some sleepers, some bust, and, we're going to talk about some very important roles. I'd like to know, while you're watching this video, think about your own sleepers. Think about who could be a potential bust. I like to know your opinion as well. And then the all-important Soto effect. We know how important Juan Soto will be on the field. The guy is a phenomenal, immense, talented on-the-field player. He's one of the best baseball players in all of baseball, hands down. But what is his effect in the clubhouse? Because that, honestly, in my opinion, that is what I am most impressed with thus far. I have a very, very good example I want to show you that actually, when I heard, I was pleasantly surprised, but, I'm going to share that with you as well. Before we get going, smash that like button, especially if you're excited. Smash that like button again. And as always, we'd love you to join the channel. Subscribe. Follow us down on X2 as well. We are going to be posting a lot more during the season. All right, so let's get into this. And as I mentioned, Will Salmon put out a great article. It's titled Inside the Mind of David Stearns, How the Mets Execs Learn to Be Dangerous. A very good article, very good article. So let's go over some of the key highlights. Okay, so the approach of a GM or president is very important. Some GMs wait to the trade deadline. Other GMs are more aggressive. But David Stearns, his approach has been, I would say, transformational over the course of his career. A year ago, he demonstrated that he would act both boldly and quickly, regardless of the date on the calendar. That is what he felt would make the team better. Didn't wait to the trade deadline. Of course, he made moves then on, but the Mets, if you remember, last year got hot in June. They had to make some bullpen decisions. They had to make some very important roster decisions, lineup changes. But because of the bold moves of David Stearns, it gave Carlos Mendoza the options and the flexibility to change things up and spur the team in a very positive direction. Yes, the Mets got hot in June, but maybe that doesn't happen if they didn't have a David Stearns to tweak the roster and change things up. According to owner Steve Cohen, he says things would have never occurred if we had a static approach. So that's what I've always said about David Stearns. Let's say we start the season on March 27. I repeat, that will not be the same team that we go into June with, July, August, or September, especially the playoffs. The roster will change, and that is how David Stearns approaches things. He is always going to be opportunistic, and he is always going to look to find ways to make the team incrementally better. And that is the approach that I like. Now, Stearns' views on being proactive. He reads the markets, and his decisions have evolved over the last 10 years since being with the Brewers. He's now 40, started when he was 30. Okay, so now he is in his second year of being president of baseball operations for the Mets, and the focus is being able to make this team into a World Series contender and obviously win the World Series. Stearns is not going to stand idly by. Stearns, his quote, he says, I am probably even more inclined to action now as I've gone throughout my career, Stearns says. I've gotten to the point where I would rather make mistakes of commission than rather making mistakes of omission. Folks, that is something I like to hear. He wants to make mistakes by action. You know, a lot of times, all right, you make a trade, you don't make a trade. If you don't make a trade, there is no reward. You want to take a little risk. And early on in David Stearns' career, and even some have said early on in the Mets' tenure, that David Stearns has been more of conservative. I say no. I say he's been following a plan, but David Stearns has admitted early on in his career he would kind of stay more conservative. Now he has more of the resources. He has more of the opportunity for that higher reward. And Stearns is saying that he is more apt to make the move. I also have noticed that Stearns, when he was early on in his Brewers tenure, year one, I think year two, he didn't make moves. It was I think year two going into year three, he had the Christian Yelich move. I expect those signature moves to come for the New York Mets as well. Will it be for getting that bona fide starting pitcher, that ace? Could be, but I do see a blockbuster kind of David Stearns signature move coming, and that's what he's alluding to in his last kind of press conference. Okay, so Stearns has definitely evolved over his tenure. He really has evolved over his tenure of being a president, over his tenure of being a general manager. Under Stearns, the Mets front office moved on from a handful of players within the first 2 months of last year. By the end of May, 6 members of the opening day roster, nearly 1/4 of the group, no longer played for the organization. Those decisions would have been harder for him to make 6 years ago. But he's better for the Mets now because of the road he traveled to get here. And now that he's arrived, he's not wasting any time. Longtime agents give Stearns credit for his ability to read player markets, knowing what to pay and who to pay. No bigger example than what played out this current offseason, specifically dealing with Pete Alonso. Yes, year and a half ago, the Mets offered him $160 million over 7 years. And as that time dwindled toward his free agency, you heard contracts being Pete Alonso, 8 years, $200 million. Then you heard the shorter term contracts where he was getting 3 years or 4 years, 120, 3 years, $93 million. But the contract came down to what the market said Pete Alonso was worth. And by David Stearns not bidding against himself, he paid Pete Alonso, what he was worth at that current time. And, according to what other agents are saying, that is a very strong attribute of David Stearns. And that is what I like. That is what I attribute the shrewdness of David Stearns being. And the guy certainly is shrewd. Okay, so the New York Mets luxury tax payroll sits currently at around $330 million, and it's close to 90 million above the initial luxury tax threshold. It's higher than Cohen thought it would be. A $765 million contract for Juan Soto obviously plays a big part into that payroll being so high. This is the third straight time that the Mets are carrying a payroll north of $300 million, a pattern preceding Stearns' arrival in late 2023. So this started before Stearns was even here. So the thing is, long term, they don't plan on maintaining bloated payrolls forever. As I've said in my past videos, the New York Mets haven't been profitable in years past. Their attendance went down in 2024 from 2023, and in the last couple of years, their net losses have been $150, $200 million. The Mets' current revenue is almost the same amount as their payroll. You can't survive with those numbers. So that is something that once the Mets establish a culture of winning and hopefully win some championships, the revenue goes up, the payroll comes down. You bring the talented youngsters up from the minors, and that should, eventually even out in a more favorable directions toward Steve Cohen making money. All right. So early in Stearns' tenure, the Mets have taken limited shots at the best players in free agency. Instead of casting a wide net for any big names willing to take their money, the Mets narrowed their focus to stars in their mid-20s. Makes sense. Last year, they went after Yoshinobu Yamamoto, ended up with the Dodgers, 12 years, $325 million. This year, again, they target another young player in their mid-20s, Juan Soto. So, facing lots of turnover in each of the last two seasons, Stearns has used trades low and mid-tier free agents. Aside from Juan Soto, the Mets' two biggest free agent signings over the offseason were Sean Manaea and Pete Alonso. But, obviously those two players were on the team, so they retained that talent from last year. Okay, so Cohen went on to say that Stearns is very disciplined. Cohen then says, I've seen him in situations not being a top bidder of somebody and somebody else gets him. It's like, should we have gotten him? I don't know. The reality is he's thinking about the budget and thinking about what's available to spend. And he understands that if he overpays on something, it could impinge on something else he wants to do down the line. He's thinking about the whole picture, not just the short term. He's thinking about everything. Now, I want us to digest this because this is so important. This quote that I just read you is by Mr. Steve Cohen. And let me just say it again. He goes, I've seen him in situations not being a top bidder of somebody and somebody else gets him. And the reason being is because David Stearns doesn't want to eliminate those resources so that a player down the line that he values more, he could use that money for. So I find it very interesting because Cohen here is kind of like, all right, I mean, I see it, kind of scratching my head. Let's see if it'll work. He's looking at the big picture, but I could see it's something that Cohen really is not used to after probably working with Epler the last couple of years. And, his approach, let's just say a Teoscar Hernandez. I mean, we went after Teoscar Hernandez, could have been a nice piece in the outfield, DH, great bat, but we weren't the high bidder. Maybe Cohen saying that's a guy that maybe I would have gave a little more money to. Maybe Yamamoto. Maybe that would have been a guy I would have gave a little more money to. So I like the fact that Steve Cohen is asking questions. I mean, David Stearns is a talented guy, but it doesn't mean he's always right. It certainly doesn't. But I do also like that Cohen respects him and gives him the space to operate. Okay, so Stearns enters each offseason with expectations of what players might get, what segments of the market might be priced more attractively than others. He gets some right. When he's wrong, he tries to understand why, dig into the factors he maybe didn't consider, or deem it an anomaly. The issue Stearns, Vice President and Special Assistant Eduardo Brizola, and the rest of the Mets front office are grappling with from the offseason is how to view the high inflation in the starting pitching market. They need to determine the reason behind it. Is that the new normal? Or were there some special factors this offseason that forced prices to soar? Despite rotation needs, the Mets chose against engaging with top pitchers from this past free agent class. And, we're going to see if that comes back to bite them. They didn't go after Corbin Burns. They didn't go after a Max Fried or Blake Snell. But nonetheless, they used free agency to rework their rotation, signing Mania, signing Montaz, signing Clay Holmes, and signing Griffin Cannon, who looked phenomenal in his last outing in spring training. Prices for starting pitchers got very high. By December 1st, the Mets have already reached an agreement with Montaz for 2 years, $34 million. Our conclusions on how we view the inflationary price of pitching from this past offseason will inform how we will interact with that segment of the market going forward, Stearns said. And that's just not the free agency segment of the market. It's how we interact with the market in trades, how we interact with the market in amateur spacing. So, I do like that. I mean, the Mets, they're not just chalking, high prices to pitchers as being a thing that will happen in the future. I like that they're saying are there other factors that are reasons why the pitching is so expensive right now. I mean, they are really kind of dissecting that, and that does make an impact on how you would attack the trade market, how you would attack the free agent market. So I do like that they're being very analytical in their approach to operating the team. Okay, so this is what I wanted to get to with you. So, a rival executive said this, and this is what I said last year. I probably had it a couple of times in a couple of videos. So, a quote from a rival executive: Stearns with money is dangerous. Again, Stearns with money is dangerous. We saw what he did with the Milwaukee Brewers with a limited budget and a limited payroll. You saw the Brewers, what they looked like in the beginning of last year. A very formidable bunch led by young superstar Jackson Chourio. The Brewers have done a very good job with nothing, and that team was virtually built by David Stearns, a super scout from another team calling attention to the price of starting pitching, raved about the Holmes signing at the time. So other executives right now are calling the Clay Holmes signing a big monumental steal. It's a viable margin play. It's what Stearns really does well. So that Clay Holmes, that move, that very creative move, is the definition of what makes David Stearns great. It's finding guys like Clay Holmes, who wasn't a starter, didn't have to pay him much, and who has that potential very high upside. Stearns has no hesitation in finding ways to leverage the Mets' financial advantage. Clue the right side of to Stone. All right, so I don't want to get into the weeds with some of the conversation, but with about a week left in spring training before opening day, the Mets are dealing with injuries. Montaz with the lat, Manaea with the oblique, Francisco Alvarez with the handmade bone, and second baseman Jeff McNeil with the oblique. All expected to play this year. I mean, nothing is a great long extended injury. So since these injuries are relatively short term, the Mets intend to rely mostly on their depth, at least for now. So the Mets, they have high profile prospects still in the minor leagues that they could rely on if, let's say the depth doesn't work out, the Cannings, the McGills, they got guys obviously down below like Brandon Sproat, but they like to see Sproat develop a bit more. There's no doubt about that. One of the Stearns principles, according to Steve Cohen, is that the roster is a living, breathing organism. From the Stearns view, allowing for more in-season decision making helps motivate his front office to constantly think of ways to improve without being tethered to a date on the calendar. And I'm going to repeat this over and over and over. And I say this all the time. David Stearns is almost like a fantasy baseball GM. Every single day, if there's a move that can make the team incrementally better, he will do it. Puts pressure on the front office to be great, puts pressure on the team to be great. If you know that, hey, they're going to change the bullpen around, if you make two or three bad outings, okay, they're going to bring another guy in there. It makes you perform at your highest, makes you prepare better, eat better, work out better. I do like this type of system. I really do. I really do. I think over the long term that we will be better off, Stearns said, but clearly it remains to be seen. All right, so you could go check it out. So these were basically the highlights from the Will Salmon article. It's very in depth. It basically tells you how David Stearns has always been a talented young general manager, a young baseball executive, but he's gotten more aggressive over time, and that the rest of baseball, the baseball experts out there predict that Stearns is going to be extremely dangerous, very scary, because he's always had the mind to be great. Now he has the resources, he has the backing, and the sky is the limit for a guy like David Stearns. And the New York Mets, I like that they are different right now. You got to think different. At the end of the day, there's only one team that wins the World Series. So if you have 30 like-minded teams, it means nothing. That winner always has to be a little different. Dodgers last year, they were different. They had a great spending spree, but they have been building this team for the last decade and a half. The New York Mets have been building this team, I'd say, probably since Steve Cohen got here. Lindor, he was that cornerstone, probably that pillar piece, him and Alonso. And now they keep adding on to that core. Adding around Alonso. Now you added Juan Soto, Sean Manaea. You added him to the staff last year. And it's been quite interesting. Very quite interesting. So let's get into some of the roster, some of the sleepers. I want to go over some sleepers, some busts, some people I am worried about on the team. Okay, so the roster. So the Mets opening day roster, and we'll go through this. It won't take that long, but I want to get your comments. Any comments you have about anything, about Stearns, the philosophy, what you're concerned about, what you're happy about. Always drop a comment. Always love to hear from you. Okay, so let's see. So with just 4 days of spring training games left for the Mets, here's a look at the roster. Right now, the rotation is looking like this. You got Clay Holmes, McGill, Griffin Canning, David Peterson, and Kodai Senga. The Mets haven't yet announced their entire plan for the starting rotation, so Canning, McGill, and Paul Blackburn are still vying for the final two spots. However, manager Carlos Mendoza announced Thursday that Peterson and Senga will stay behind when the rest of the team heads to Houston so that they can pitch in minor league games on Tuesday and Wednesday, respectively. Okay. There have been a lot of people. I would say baseball purists who would kind of not like that. They wouldn't like if a Peterson or a Sanga would stay behind. They would feel that, oh, you got to travel with the team, this and that. But I really don't like. I really don't mind that. I really like putting every single player, giving them the best opportunity to feel the best for when they are out there to effectively help your team. So if you have Peterson and Senga staying back and that'll translate into them being better in their starts, why the hell not? Why the hell not? Yeah, so I mean, the strategy involved, decisions regarding Sanger and Peterson. New York wants to give Sanger as much time as possible to prepare for the season, and the Mets prefer to pitch Peterson against Miami instead of Houston because the Astros plan to trot out 8 right-handed regulars and the lone left-handed bat Jordan Alvarez. I mean, I guess it's strategy early on, but I mean, if Peterson is the guy we truly think he is, I mean, I wouldn't really think too much into that so early on, but you gotta practice for later in the season. So having a little strategy early on isn't so bad of a thing. Okay, so the bullpen is looking like this. So it looks like you have Edwin Diaz, Ryan Stanek, Reed Garrett, Jose Budo, Danny Young, Anthony Gose, Max Kranick, and Paul Blackburn. Um, See, that bullpen is similar to what I have projected. My projection was Edwin Diaz, AJ Minter, Jose Budo, Reed Garrett, Ryan Stanek, Danny Young, Max Kranick, Paul Blackburn. Okay, so fairly similar. But the thing that I was thinking about and the thing that I was looking, and you'll notice this with the lineup, the Mets have been doing a pretty good job with the homegrown guys to the lineup. But to the bullpen, we got to start developing guys in the bullpen. I mean, there's not one guy, I believe, Daniel Nunez, he's not healthy right now, but there's not one guy that we have. Oh, I'm sorry. We have Budo. Okay, so Budo. Besides Budo. So not one guy besides Budo that we have homegrown in our bullpen. I mean, that's what we got to start doing. We got to start developing arms for our bullpen, and that'll be a huge monumental difference because that is something other teams are doing that just we're simply not. We're simply not. Okay, so you got the rotation, you got the bullpen. So in the bullpen, AJ Minter and Daniel Nunez are going to be the big wild cards. If those two guys could stay healthy and Edwin Diaz can revert to some part of that 2022 form, it looks like our bullpen will be pretty decent. So the candidates to replace Minter and Nunez, if they're not ready to go, look to be Kranick, Ghost, Brazabon, Zuber, or Genesis Cabrera. So it's good. It's going to be a battle, but I don't really. The spots in the bullpen have never been set for the New York Mets, especially under David Stearns. It's going to be who are the guys performing at the highest level and who are the guys who are productive. I expect David Stearns to operate similar to how he did last year. The bullpen's probably going to change a lot. You're probably going to have injuries, but if you can have those guys that we mentioned, healthy for the majority of the season, Diaz, Minter, and Daniel Nunez, I think the bullpen will overall be fine. All right, so let's go to what the lineup will look like, and this is what you're going to see out of the lineup. You do have a lot of homegrown talent, which I like, and we're going to talk about that. So with Alvarez sideline, and of course he would have been the starter, and he is a homegrown guy. You're going to have Torrens sliding into the starter role, and I do love that. Torrens has been hitting very well in spring training. The guy has a great hit to him. The guy has an excellent arm behind the plate. The pitching staff loves throwing to him as well. So we got to be very happy to have a backup like Luis Torrens. Backing him up will be a guy, probably will be a guy like Hayden Singer. The Mets like Singer's excellent defense and his familiarity with the pitching staff. So I think that really kind of stands out. Infielders looking like this, folks, and look at it. Look at the homegrown talent here. Pete Alonso at first, Brett Beatty, Brett Beatty at second. Lindor, you got him. You got him in a trade. Mark Vientos, homegrown talent. And Luis Angel Acuna, he's going to be fighting as well. But, it's going to round off. You got Pete at first, Brett Beatty at second. Short, you have Lindor, obviously. Third base, you have Vientos. And catching, when he's healthy, you got Alvarez. So you love the homegrown talent. You got to love it. And then you have Nimmo in the outfield. So a lot of homegrown guys. And Jeff McNeil, when he's healthy, he's another homegrown guy. But I think the story here, and I have a couple sleepers, but Francisco Alvarez was my number one sleeper. He's injured, but Brett Beatty is another sleeper. His performance right now in spring training is the ceiling, really, that you expected from Beatty. Really, what you expected from Beatty so far in what is he at? He has 50 plate appearances, 2 home runs, 10 RBIs. 333 batting average, 400 on base, 622 slug. I mean, this is the Brett Beatty that we were always asking for. And what really kind of stands out to me is his walk rate in spring training has been the highest that I've seen him so far in the major leagues. It's at 10%. So that's good. His K rate has really plummeted down. Last year in 2024, it was 25%. In 2023, it's 28%. In spring training thus far, in a very limited sample, it is 10%. So he's putting the ball in play, making contact, being a lot more patient. And, Brett Beatty is going to be a huge key. And I'll say this right now. If Brett Beatty comes out and he performs, it is his job to lose. He lost last year. It was his job to lose the third base job, and he did. He lost it. Unfortunately, he lost it. But you know what? I like the fact this kid, he was a high draft pick, a highly touted prospect. He gets another chance, so I do like that. So he's going to be getting his chance at second base. All right. And then, Mark Vientos, I would say if you do fantasy baseball, that's probably going to be your best value right there. In limited play, Vientos had 27 home runs, a very decent number of RBIs. I expect this guy to be an easy 30 and 100 RBI situation. 30 and 100. That's an easy 30 and 100. So, with that, look at who's hitting in front of him. You got Alonso, Soto, Lindor. Those guys are going to work the account. Those guys are going to get on base. So Vientos is going to have a lot of men on base, a lot of RBI opportunities. The guy's got power. You saw what he did in the playoffs. The moment isn't too big for him. I think Vientos is going to have a monumental year. In the outfield, it's going to be simple. If these guys are healthy, the outfield's going to look like this. Juan Soto in right, Nimmo in left, Siri in center. Siri has shown his defensive capabilities, how good he can be in center field. I mean, it's a thing of beauty to watch this guy go out. I like to see him go back on balls. The guy really is a sight to see. And he's got pop. He's got pop too. I think he's got 3 home runs, 11 RBIs. So he's driving and runs. He's got pop at the end of the lineup. I like to see that. I like to see a lot more contact. He's still batting over 200 in a limited sample size. So if Jose Siri, if he walks a bit more and shortens up his swing, asking a lot, but the guy he's certainly a 4-tool player. He's the definition of a 4-tool player. So I do like his other assets. And then you got Tyrone Taylor, Jesse Winker, and Starling Marte. So the Mets have outfield depth, very outfield depth. And just at DH, you're going to have mostly Starling Marte and Jesse Winker. Marte is healthy. He's going to hit against lefties. Winker he's going to hit mostly against righties. And then you have Tyrone Taylor as well, and he'll supplement that. He'll probably switch off with Jose Siri in center, and he may DH as well. All right, folks. So that's basically the lineup. My sleepers, just to go over my whole list, I have Francisco Alvarez coming off a very disappointing year. If he comes back and he's healthy, guys did a lot of work on his swing over the offseason. I see him being a sleeper. Brett Beatty, obviously being sent down to the minors in the last couple of years. I see a lot of potential there. So I see him being a sleeper. But other guys, Tyler McGill, I see that this year finally being the year where he puts it together. Tyler McGill being a sleeper. The Daniel Nunez, although he did come on strong, he was injured. And, I think that makes him, a risk. But if he's healthy, I think he's a phenomenal sleeper. He's got closer ability, certainly eighth inning stuff. He's got nasty, nasty stuff to Daniel Nunez, and I think he's a major X factor too. So I would say not only is he a sleeper, but he's certainly an X factor. Guys who have bust potential, to have bust potential in my eyes means you have to have um, great expectations, right? So to be a bust, you have to have great expectations to begin with. And some of those guys, I gotta say Senga. Senga's a guy who, was unhealthy the whole last year. But still, despite that, the guy's an all-star. The guy was very successful in year one, and he's both, he's relied to be as our ace. We're looking at him as an ace. So I think by that, I hope to God, no, but he was a bust last year, and that being said, he has the potential to be a bust this year as well. Another guy who has the potential to be a bust, and I hope to God that he's not, but Edwin Diaz. Edwin Diaz has had a couple years. One year great, one year not so great, another year really great. His velocity is a bit down. So, that's a guy that, again, he's got great high expectations. So therefore, there is that bust potential. All right, studs. I'm gonna put the studs here again. I'm gonna put Vientos as a stud. I young 25-year-old kid, not afraid of the big moment, and another stud because of the fact that he doesn't have any long-term contracts attached to him. I'm gonna say Pete Alonso. I think Pete Alonso. There's not a lot of risk with him. And I think he's going to prove the doubters wrong. I think it was always inside of Pete. Pete didn't lose bat speed. He didn't get old. The fact of the matter, with Pete last year, it was mental. Thinking about his contract, that he changed agents. He was really thinking about a lot of stuff that he wasn't really supposed to, saying a lot of things that early on Pete wouldn't say, focusing on him being an all-star, focusing on him getting 40 home runs. These are not things that Pete Alonso would focus on. If you hear Lindor talk about, they asked the same question to Lindor a couple months later. Are you upset about being an all-star? And he goes, those things really don't matter to me. It matters more about the whole team's success. And I think that is really Pete Alonso's mentality, but obviously he was focusing on getting a big contract. So his mind wasn't in a good spot. I feel his mental aspect is a lot. It's there. It's there now. All right. So you got your sleepers, you got your bust, and you got your Stearns stuff. Now, what is I think going to be the most underrated part of this whole offseason? And I think it's going to be Soto's effect off the field. Off the field. And, what impressed me early on, and we all know Soto did that very nice and gracious thing where he gave Brett Beatty the car. Didn't have to do that. He gave him the car because Brett Beatty gave him number 22. Get a $90,000 car. I'd give up the number 2. All right, but I do like the camaraderie. It's not easy for a guy that is this talented and has this much money. Sometimes it's not easy for a guy like that to get along in the clubhouse. But, Juan Soto has really adapted very, very well. Naturally, joking, really routinely joking with many of his teammates. Jose Siri, Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor. It seems like he's known these guys for years. And in some cases he has, but it seems like he has that close bond already. So Soto has had a very dominating spring training, hitting 357, 1,300 OPS, 4 home runs, 8 RBI, 28 at bats. But what I read I believe Will Salmon had this as well. It was in early February. It was the early batting practice. Brandon Nimmo, Juan Soto, Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor, star-studded group, all taking batting practice. In the beginning, the batting practice was very mundane. Each guy would go out there, take their swings, next guy go up, take their swings. So they were working on directional hitting. And, again, it was boring. It was a snooze fest. Juan Soto, toward the end of the drills, said this. He calls out last round, everybody work on your line drives, and it became a little bit of a competition. So they do the little bit of the competition, and all of a sudden, the juices start flowing. Salmon stated, you see them grinning in the batter's box. It was a total different vibe. And even Brandon Nimmo even said it. It felt like we were 10 years old in the sandlot. And that to me is leadership. And Nimmo even said it himself. And he said that was an act of leadership. And also, we've seen it on TV during these games. He's letting his hair down. He's no longer playing for that big contract. We see somebody who knows where he's going to be for the next 15 years. And I think there's something to that as far as being comfortable to being a New York Met. And you know what, folks? I think at the end of the day, that cannot be understated. Juan Soto cannot be a guy who stands in the corner with his $1,000 glove and his, $10,000 sunglasses, who sits in the corner and it to himself. No, if this is going to work, you need a guy who is a leader on and off the field. And I am so super glad that Juan Soto is having that type of approach and that type of mentality, because that is what is going to take the team to the next level. You don't need a prima donna. You don't need a prima donna. But what you do need is a guy who is a legit winner. And Juan Soto is a winner, folks. He won at a very early, young age. This guy's not fazed by the playoffs. As we saw last year, carried the New York Yankees to the World Series, did phenomenal in the playoffs. And we've got a bunch of players on this team who are good under pressure. Francisco Lindor, money on the line, hitting home runs against the Braves, the Phillies, carrying this team. Pete Alonso, great clutch hit, one of the biggest home runs in Mets history against the Brewers in the wild card. I mean, he did great in the playoffs as well. Then you have Mark Viento's, great performance in the playoffs. Now you have Juan Soto. You're having bats up and down the lineup who are not fazed by the big moment. I still see a signature move coming. I'm still believing it's going to be geared toward acquiring a frontline pitcher. We're going to have to see what the Mets, what the front office, what I said early on about the Stearns, their front office analyzing the pitching market, the prices. That's all factored into everything. How they approach trades, how they approach next year, what they do this year at the deadline. It is very, very important. It's monumental. It's all important. So, folks, let me know what you think. As always, we'd love to have you here. If you are not yet subscribed, hit that subscribe button. Again, we love you to join the channel. If you want to check us out on X at Dominant Mets, we are trying to build up that platform as well. Thank you as always. I will speak to everyone very, very soon. Have a great day, folks.